China poses a systemic threat, not just to us, but to every other country in the free world.
Over the course of 2 days in October 1860, a group of 5,000 British and French soldiers took part in what has been described as the greatest act of cultural vandalism in modern history, the sacking of the old Summer Palace in Beijing. In total, an estimated 1.5 million priceless treasures were stolen, after which the troops proceeded to burn the palace to the ground.
We are in China, at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. The Qing dynasty, in power since the eviction of the Ming, has reigned in prosperity for a century and has successfully asserted itself as a world trader. In Europe, the French Revolution has said farewell to its monarchy, and the old continent will, within a few decades, be transformed forever by the Industrial Revolution. All these are highlights from the colonial period. In the Middle Kingdom, exports of tea, porcelain and silk are balanced by imports of opium-generating armed conflicts between all the countries involved. In August 1860, at the end of the Second Opium War, a Franco-British coalition army pillages and sets light to the Summer Palace. Six days after the fire, the Allied forces and the Chinese imperial government signed the Treaty of Peking. This treaty is particularly uneven for the defeated Chinese, who are obliged to pay heavy dues to the foreign powers. An uncertain period starts for the Qing and their summer palace. The 17-arch bridge has survived, but its bridgehead is badly damaged. The foundations of Fosxiangge have been partially destroyed. The bronze pavilion has remained intact, but is engulfed within galloping vegetation. The marble boat has lost its floors, and that too is being swallowed up by nature. In 1901, a treaty is proposed and accepted by Cixi, who wants the Allies to leave her country. But it imposes the creation of embassies in parts of the city that will be forbidden to Chinese people. It becomes the foundation for rights and concessions in the principal port cities such as Shanghai. The Chinese must also send ambassadors abroad. The defeat of the Chinese army wins very favourable territorial rights for the Allies. Manchuria goes to the Russians, Shandong to the Germans. The basin of the Blue River is to be controlled by the British. For the French, taking advantage of their control of the Tonkin, they settle in the three southwestern provinces.
The Summer Palace, the majority of which was built across the 18th century during the reigns of emperors Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, covered a total area of 3.5 square kilometers and consisted of an elaborate array of pavilions, temples and palaces dotted amongst stunning man-made lakes and hills. And, most importantly for the invaders, the complex housed millions of unique and priceless treasures. The troops arrived at the Summer Palace the next day, on the 7th of October, and although the French troops allegedly began looting first, the British troops were quick to join in. So numerous was the loot taken that the commanding officer of the British forces, James Hope Grant, ordered his troops to gather as many carts as possible to transport the stolen goods. James Hope Grant is seen here leaning on a Chinese vase at the Summer Palace, which he may or may not have later taken. The looting lasted for 2 days across the 7th and 8th of October 1860, and it is estimated that approximately 1.5 million objects were taken in total. Reports also claim that some soldiers took pleasure in using chandeliers for target practice and played catch with large mirrors. The majority of the looted items were high-value items that were also light and portable, such as pearls, ivory, jade, gold, and silk. Although there were some larger items as well, like the throne of the first ruler of the Qing dynasty, Emperor Shunzhi. Much of the stolen goods were auctioned on the 16th of October to raise the reward money for the troops involved in the invasion of the capital. Many of the troops who didn't join in the looting purchased the items, as did many Chinese merchants who were keen to get their hands on some imperial loot. Yet, a large portion of the loot was ultimately taken back to Europe by the Anglo-French forces and was later either given as a gift, sold at an auction, or repurposed as a war trophy. In 1861, 608 of the stolen objects were presented to the Emperor of France, Napoleon III. A newspaper drawing from the time shows the collection, which included the Qing Emperor's war costume and a 2-meter-high Buddhist stupa. Much of the loot went straight to the auction house as soon as it arrived on the European continent. A study of auctions held in Paris between 1861 and 1869 recorded that thousands of items sold had originated as loot from the Summer Palace. This includes almost 400 pieces of porcelain, over 300 pieces of lacquer, approximately 275 pieces of jade, 80 pieces of furniture, 30 paintings, and 25 weapons. Perhaps surprisingly, a large portion of the loot was taken back to Europe and simply forgotten about, only to be rediscovered by chance over a century later. This was the case for the loot of the Royal Marine Captain Harry Louis Evans. During the sacking of the Summer Palace, he succeeded in getting several enamelled vases, a set of imperial porcelain, and this bronze water vessel, which dates from the Western Zhou dynasty 3,000 years ago. The vessel is extremely rare, and only 6 such vessels exist. This particular one is known as the Tiger Ying because its lid is cast with the model of a tiger. The vessel travelled with Evan back to his home and then sat on the shelf of his family's house in the southeast of England for several generations, after which it was stored in the family attic for many decades. The vessel was only rediscovered by chance in 2018. Later that year, the vessel was purchased by an anonymous buyer at an auction for £410,000, and then it was gifted to the National Museum of China. There are likely many other such treasures waiting to be rediscovered.